Hello, everybody. Welcome to the News Desk. This is the World of Concacaf podcast. I'm Eric Schmitz.
I'm Jonathan Slate.
And I'm Donald White. Did you hear that? Slate's back. Slate is back. Back in the fold.
It's nice to have all three of the squad here tonight. Been a little bit of a break since we recorded our last episode. We took a break for the holidays. And of course, the big one was the 4th of July, Independence Day in the U.S. But I also do want to shout out Happy Emancipation Day, July 1st, to Bonaire and St. Martin. Happy Canada Day also.
Happy Baba Bonilla Day.
Happy Baba Bonilla Day. Happy Independence Day to the Bahamas. That was July 11th. And then, of course, July 14th, Happy Fête Nationale to Guadeloupe, Martinique, and St. Martin. It's the holidays. Everyone needs to break. Everyone needs to relax, have some fun. And we took a little break, but there was so much going on. So we have to touch on all of it. First things first, we want to shout out our Patreon subscribers. Thank you to everyone who subscribes to our Patreon. We have a new patron, an executive patron. The most important thing, Donald, you want to shout him out?
Yes, it is an actuary. He is a buddy of mine, and he is the most important person in the world. That man is Jared Christensen. Jared, thank you for being an executive. We're not even executives. You are higher than us on a certain level. I don't know what we're gonna do with you. We're gonna have to really step it up now.
Listen, this is Concacaf. He gets envelopes full of cash. Unmarked envelope full of cash.
I'm not going to tell you which cash it's going to be.
Or what it's for, wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
It's an envelope full of Monopoly money, also known as loonies.
Yeah, nothing is worth anything, All right. So thank you, Jared, for support. Thank you to all of our patrons. Again, you can go to our Patreon, patreon.com/podcacaf. Subscribe. We've got some content. We'll have a one more round episode up there. You can look back at our past one more rounds and some bonus content, things of that nature. Cool stuff. But lots of Concacaf going on. The most recent major thing is the Concacaf W Championship just wrapped up. So we're going to talk about that. Really the first Concacaf W Championship under this name. Donald, why don't you tell us what's at stake with this?
I do want to quickly shout out Google because earlier today, when I went, because doing a little research the episode, and I went and typed in Concacaf W Championship, fireworks show up in the search history.
That's
red,
cool.
white, and blue fireworks. So
they do that. They do that for championships because they did it for the Gold Cup and they did it for Nations League.
Yeah, that's just the first time I recognize that. So shout out Google for recognizing the importance of the Concacaf W Championship.
It's true.
It's the greatest women's tournament on the planet.
Most prestigious
for sure. Because we win everything else as America. So this is the one. Obviously it's under a new name. That's the one we hadn't won yet. So let's go through what was at stake. As Eric mentioned. It served not only as the regional championship, the Confederation Championship, but it also served as qualifying for both the 2023 Women's World Cup and the 2024 Olympics. There were 8 teams split into 2 groups. The top 2 teams from both Group A and B qualified directly for the World Cup. So we have 4 teams that are in it. We obviously will tell you the results in just a second. The third place teams from each group qualified for the Interconfederation playoffs, which take place in February 2023. And there's obviously that was for the World Cup part. Now for the Olympic part, the winner of the tournament, it was the only team that was able to qualify directly for the 2024 Olympics. The runner-up and third place finisher face each other in a playoff in September 2023. So those 2 teams will have qualified for the World Cup, but they will have to play another playoff in September of 2023 for the last spot for CONCACAF in the Olympics.
Now, before we get into the results, I just want to ask you guys, how do you feel about this double qualification, consolidating into one tournament and having so much at stake?
I don't like it on its face, because I think that what we have talked about a lot through this podcast is how important it is for specifically some of these other CONCACAF women's teams to be playing more meaningful games. And so I don't love taking away another tournament. But I will say there is at least a little bit of a consolation, the fact of like we're seeing the W Gold Cup making a return, and we're seeing the W Nations League. So those two things in and of its whole are better, but I don't like the double qualification tournament.
I don't either. I know we'll talk about it for the men as well, because the same thing happened. I say on the men's side, but it's really on the men's youth side where it happened. But I think for the women, the idea is to have more competitive games, to have more of these showcases, and to have more of these opportunities for, not necessarily for the United States and Canada, but for the rest of the Confederation to play against quality competition and playing games that matter. And honestly, I'd love to see over the next 4 years that CONCACAF come up with a way to make World Cup qualifying be something where it's not a foregone conclusion in a tournament, right? Like for this tournament, you got out of the group stage, you were in the World Cup, and there wasn't really anything to kind of celebrate. No one celebrated being in the World Cup because there was still a tournament left. I'd love to see it where they get to a point where it's kind of like on the men's side, where you have rounds and you have, double round robin or something, where there's some finality to it, where the tournament, where the tournament ends with, hey, the last match day, we know that these, 3 or 4 teams are in the World Cup.
Yeah. And add in the fact of like, not only like, was there a tournament, like was there a lot of the tournament left when some of these things were decided? And, I'm going to go in a little bit and kind of recap the group stage results. But I mean, you had games that were decided within, you had people that knew they were going to the World Cup within 2 games when they had over half the tournament left to play.
Yeah. And for this tournament, Canada and the U.S. got automatic bids in. So theoretically, we did have teams that only won 2 games and got a spot in the World Cup. So there wasn't a lot of effort needed for Canada and the United States. Well, of course, they're superior, and we'll see what happens. At least 6 of the teams had to like play their way into this tournament. And for it to be so quickly decided, oh, hey, you're going to the friggin' World Cup after winning 2 games. It's less than a week's work to get in for some teams. And you'd like to think it's more of a process, because there's nothing beats World Cup qualifying, especially on the men's side, where it's such this long process. You'd love to see us on the women's side too.
I do like the tournament format for the Olympics, because again, the Olympics was only 2 spots. And I mean, we can talk later about the Olympic tournament kind of expanding, hopefully. But the 2 spots that they have, I do like that they have it set up where, the winner goes the spoils, right? The only team that qualified directly was the winner of the tournament. And then 2nd and 3rd place will have to play later on in the playoff. I think that's really cool. That adds some intrigue to that spot. And I like the format of the tournament for this. But for the World Cup, like you said, 2 teams knew on Thursday after playing on Monday that they're in the World Cup, and then they still had 3 games to go. Yeah.
So let's get to what happened and who actually got into the World Cup. Jonathan, why don't you tell us what happened in the group stage?
Yeah. So we had 2 groups of 4. The top 2 teams from each group qualifying directly for the Women's World Cup. The 3rd place teams advancing to interconfederational playoff. So out of the Group A, which was the United States, Jamaica, Haiti, and Mexico, the U.S. finished on 9 points, winning all 3 of their games. Jamaica finishing in 2nd on 6. Haiti with 3 points. And then the host, Mexico, who there was some pretty good, hype about this team, finished with 0 points, failing to score a single goal in a tournament hosted at home.
Now, I've got 2 points here on this Mexican squad. One, you hate to see it, not even scoring a goal at home. They're hosting the tournament. You got to get it done out there when you're at home on your own soil. But also, great for Jamaica and Haiti, because you would have looked at this group to start, and you would have penciled in U.S. and Mexico. You're getting through. You're going to the World Cup. But Jamaica and Haiti, great performances there.
Yeah, no, great performance for them. So moving on to Group B. So we had Canada, Costa Rica, Panama, and Trinidad and Tobago. So Canada finishing on 9 points. In first place, Costa Rica finishing with 6 points. Panama finishing in third and advancing to the Intercontinental Playoff. And then Trinidad and Tobago, 0 points, conceding 11 goals in the tournament. Yeah, definitely the least good team. I'm not going to call them the worst, but yeah, the worst team in the tournament.
Yeah. So we've got these 4 teams who auto qualify for the Women's World Cup, go to the knockout stage. U.S., Jamaica, Canada, Costa Rica, still a lot to play for them. Essentially, it's double elimination to get into the Olympic Games. So in the semifinals, the U.S. beats Costa Rica 3-0. Canada beats Jamaica 3-0. Identical scores on the same day. You kind of would have expected the U.S. and Canada to end up in the final here. So the third place match to advance to the Olympic play-in game, Jamaica actually gets to win 1-0 in extra time. And then in the final, the United States, Canada, a rematch from the Olympics back in 2020-21. That was a weird one. U.S. getting revenge. 1-0 victory over Canada on an Alex Morgan penalty in the 78th minute. And the U.S. takes home another Concacaf Women's Championship. Just thoughts on the final. It was a penalty, right?
Like, it was obvious. A penalty.
Yeah,
it was absolutely.
They're saying, no, it was. I think it was stone cold the penalty. Yeah. I know that Bev, the Canadian coach, was complaining. But it was a stone cold penalty. At first, I will say I thought it wasn't. But then we saw it on the rewatch where Rose gets so clearly clipped as she's running past. It
was a bad clip too. It wasn't
it wasn't even like
it wasn't like a graze where she kind of threw her. She clipped one leg into the other. We used to do that to people's kids, and they would you know how people fall when they get clipped like that. That was a no brainer.
Yes.
Yeah. So, solid victory. Pen's a pen. The U.S. had plenty of chances. They dominated. The expected goals were heavily in the U.S.'s favor. Arguably, they should have been well ahead when that penalty was called. There were arguably other opportunities where there could have been penalties called. But Canada didn't really threaten too much there. And the U.S., even with a squad they weren't at full strength. They were missing almost an all-star team's worth of, almost a starting 11 worth of great world-class players they didn't have on the squad, and they still got it done.
So I want to talk a little bit about Canada a little less, but mainly the United States, because obviously these two teams, as you mentioned, were the two teams coming in. They were the class of the Confederation. Everyone expected them to make the final. They did, and neither team played well while doing that. Neither team really, until that final game, the United States, I thought, played their best game of the tournament against Canada in the final. It led a lot of people to think, because we'll talk about the fact that there's other confederations also having their tournaments on. The Euros are on, Women's Africa Cup of Nations is on, Women's Copa America is on. And people are saying, oh, well, these games are clearly better. The U.S. is losing ground to the rest of the world. I'm here to tell you that the United States women's national team, while they struggled during this tournament, they did not enter this tournament trying to be at full strength. They entered this tournament to try and get to the final and beat Canada to get back to the Olympics. And really all they did was they rose to the level of their competition. Canada, once they got Canada in front of them, the revenge factor was there. And also the fact that they're staring at another top 10 team. And they said, hey, everyone, all tournament people have been talking about the rest of the world had caught up to them. And they wanted to show that, nope, we will literally pepper this goal with shots and make, the Canadian goalkeeper had a ridiculous, she was the goalkeeper of the tournament. and she had a ridiculous game. I think she had 8 saves or something like that. It was something ridiculous.
Yeah, 7 or 8. I mean, Sheridan was really, really good.
Yeah,
really good, really good. And the idea was the U.S. said, "Hey, you're not going to score on us because you're going to be too busy trying to stop all of these shots we're taking because we're the better team. We're the best team in the world." And I think people need to really pump their brakes when they say that teams in Europe or teams in Africa are catching up to them or have caught up to them or have passed them. I've heard all of those over the last 2 weeks. And I'm telling you, everyone's wrong because we don't know. Eric, you just mentioned an all-star team of people who are out due to injury, due to having a baby, or to being pregnant. Like all of those fair things to be left off. And that's not counting people who are left off the squad, like Kristen Press, who are left off the squad. You have so many, they could field. If you think about the top, players in the world, just 2 years ago, Kristen Press was named the 8th best player on the planet, and she did not make this roster. There's so many great players that are not going to make the roster going over to Australia. And there's so many players on this roster that, are going to have to contend with people coming back from, again, injury or maternity leave. This is a squad that I think people need to really pump their brakes on when they say that other people have caught up to them, because I don't see it at all. These players are so much better than everybody else.
I'm gonna take the opposite point, because I think it was pretty clear the U.S. struggled in some of these environments. Yes, I know that there was an all-star team's worth of players missing, but there also comes a point where a team like the U.S. needs to cycle out some of these older players and just kind of roll with the other players that are available. But we saw them struggle against a Mexico team that struggled to score, that didn't score a single goal this tournament. They struggled in a hostile environment. And when they go to the World Cup, it is not going to be playing at home in front of a packed U.S. crowd. We know that, of course, anytime the U.S. plays in the World Cup, there, especially on the women's side, huge crowds that follow the women's team. But they struggled. They struggled to deal with some of the CONCACAF-ness of Mexico. And I'm going to be interested. I haven't watched much of the Copa America or the women's AFCON, but I have watched a good bit of the Euros. And some of those squads look really, really good.
But
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I was going to take a different point than both of you, because you guys have similar but different opinions. I think we saw the U.S. struggle because, especially that game against Mexico, they get a 1-0 victory. It was an 89th minute goal. They struggled, but they'd never played. That was the first CONCACAF away competitive game that the U.S. women's national team has played since 2010. And that was a game they lost. They aren't familiar with these environments. And when you're playing 2 friendlies in a weekend against Uzbekistan, sure, they look great. They look like world beaters. But there's a great leveler in world soccer, and that's tough environments. And when you go to some of these countries where it's not pristine fields, it's not a heavily home crowd, you can struggle a little bit. And what happens when you struggle a little bit? How do you handle that as a player when you cannot punch a goal in against this team that you should beat, a game that you need to win, that it's a competitive game? If you're not getting that experience, if you go 12 years without playing a game that matters in a tough environment outside of your home country, man, you do struggle. And I think we saw a little bit of that. And I think we did see that the quality of some of these mid-level teams in CONCACAF, it is getting better.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. You're Jamaica, I thought, is much more improved. Haiti, we're going to talk about them very, very soon, but they've improved. And, I think, there's other teams that have, but I want to give you 2 points, one on the CONCACAF side, then on the Euro side. Okay. So for the CONCACAF side, I think you guys saw this last night. We've played 11 women's championships. The United States have played in 10 of them. They were the hosts of the World Cup in 99, so they didn't have to qualify. So they've played in 10. They've won 9 of them. Okay. In those 10 tournaments, they have conceded 6 goals total. Over 32 years, they have only allowed 6 goals in this tournament. So everyone who's like, yes, they struggle, but for them, that's why they didn't want to be at 100% for this, because they don't, in their mind, they don't have to be. It's going to take a Herculean effort for someone to even score against them. The defending Olympic gold medalists could not score a goal against them. They could barely get the ball across midfield for several points of the game. And on the Euro side, I will say this, for people saying that the Euros have a bunch of teams that look good, they do. But the last time the United States won the World Cup, they beat the Euros to get it. The last 3 teams they played were European teams, the 3 best European teams that they have. They ran through all of them on their way to. The only European team that has beaten them in the last 4 years, Sweden in last year's Olympics. That's it.
Now, I do want to cut you off right there because this is a Concacaf podcast.
Podcast.
And not a European podcast. So we're going to stop talking about European teams. So the U.S. wins the Concacaf W Championship. Alex Morgan with the golden ball. Canada's Julia Grosso with the golden boot. She had 3 goals as well as 3 other players. Kaylin Sheridan, the Canadian keeper, with the golden glove. And Melchi Dumornay of Haiti, young player of the tournament. And I did get a kick out of the fact that Canada won fair play because, they're so nice and polite. So what you would assume. So another successful Concacaf W Championship, and we'll be talking more about that later. I think it's time for scoreboard watch because there is important things going on around Concacaf that aren't necessarily a championship, and that is the St. Kitts and Nevis Premier League. So last weekend, we had some big results. Trafalgar South Stars with a 1-0 victory over Newton United. St. Peter's going into Dieppe Bay, getting a 2-1 victory. And then Garden Hotspur, big 1-0 victory over Village Superstars. So lots of good action. We've actually got a great matchup coming up with Garden Hotspur and St. Paul's United playing this weekend, 3rd place, hosting 1st place. Big action in the St. Kitts and Nevis Premier League.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah. CONCACAF matters. That's essentially what we need to remember here.
Shout out to the train.
Yeah.
Choo-choo.
All right. So CONCACAF W wasn't the only championship we had recently. We had the men's under 20 championship. And like the CONCACAF W, there's a lot at stake. Jonathan, what was at stake for this year's men's U-20 championship?
Yeah. So first of all, so it's 20-team tournament with 4 different groups. What was on it was much like we saw with the Concacaf W Championship. There were not 1 but 2 things on the line. So 4 teams from CONCACAF would be advancing to represent as CONCACAF representatives at the U-20 World Cup in 2023 in Indonesia. But also 2 CONCACAF representatives for the 2024 Summer Olympics. And if you're an American listening, qualification for the Summer Olympics on the men's side is a bit of a touchy subject. Some of us are scarred from instances we witnessed in person, such as the debacle in 2012 in Nashville. Still to this day, when you go up 4-0 against Canada and giving up 4 to draw, I'm still haunted by that.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. That's ancient history. So and the U.S. still hadn't qualified since then. So there's a lot
since 2008.
Yeah. So there was a lot at stake for the U.S. program. It's been a touchy subject for the U.S. It was interesting. Like we talked about this with the women, where it's like you have 2 levels of competition where it's like you can qualify for this or qualify for this. For this tournament, it was the quarterfinals. If you won your quarterfinal game, you went to the U-20 World Cup. If you won your semifinal, you're in the Olympics. So getting into the knockout was key, because once you get into the knockout, anything can happen. So in the group stage, I'll just run through the groups
real quick. I will say that I like this a little bit better for the men or for the youth team than I do for the women's, because the Olympics for on the men's side is a U-23 tournament, which is just like an odd age group, and it falls into a time like usually that playoff is it's not a FIFA window, so teams aren't releasing the best players, and so you run into a situation not just for the US but for a lot of CONCACAF teams where they're putting out like a kind of like hodgepodge makeshift group of players, and it's not even the best representation of the players that would be available to play the tournament.
Also, I kind of like this as well. I don't know if they're going to keep doing this, but the fact that this was a U-20 championship that served as Olympic qualification, because these kids will be of age to play on the U-23s when that tournament comes around. So I think that was very interesting to it. Usually we see this tournament happen like the year of the Olympics, so those guys can just go. But it'll be interesting to see that the crop of kids that make the World Cup from here, or at least make the Olympics from here, get to kind of
all be age
grow
eligible.
with that.
Yeah, they'll all be age eligible.
Yeah. And because this is CONCACAF, and CONCACAF likes to do dumb shit frequently, the format of this tournament was also kind of weird. So the top 16 ranked youth national teams were qualified for the group stage. They also had U-20 qualifying that took place prior to the tournament. And those 4 qualifying winners advanced directly to the knockout. So the top 16 had to play their way into the knockout, but so did everyone who was below the top 16. They just got to skip the group stage, not like qualify for the tournament, then do the group stage, then go to the knockout. They just got to skip right to the knockout. So the group stage winners in Group E, we had US, Cuba, and Canada advancing to the knockout. St. Kitts and Nevis, they had a rough tournament. Minus 20 goal difference, got rocked by the US 10-0. They didn't make it. In Group F, Mexico, Haiti, and Trinidad and Tobago advancing to the knockout. Suriname did not. Group G, El Salvador, Guatemala, Panama advanced to the knockout. Aruba, not so much. And in Group H, the host Honduras, Costa Rica, and Jamaica into the knockout. Antigua and Barbuda went home. So those teams that finished the top 3 in their group advanced to the knockout to join Curacao, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Nicaragua in the knockout stage. Donald, tell us about the knockout stage.
Yeah, so I'm not going to bore you with all of the round of 16 because, as you mentioned, you mentioned the teams that made the round of 16. Yeah.
The quarterfinals that matter.
The quarterfinals that matter, but I do want to point out that there were 2 upsets in the round of 16. The first one, the Dominican Republic with a 5-4 victory over El Salvador. That was a bit of a surprise for people. Actually, that was a very big surprise for people. And then the other one was Canada losing to Guatemala on penalties. There was a 1-1 tie after extra time, and they lost 4-3 on penalties. Penalties are going to be something that Guatemala deals with quite a bit during this tournament. So, but they were able to get past Canada. Canada, who had a great run. Of course, their women are in the Olympics. Their men, did well during World Cup qualifying to qualify for the World Cup for the first time in 36 years, but they will not be in the 2024 Olympics, which is very interesting. So let's go to the quarters. This is where the winners qualified for the U-20 World Cup that will take place next year. The United States beat Costa Rica 2-0. Panama loses to Honduras 2-1. The Dominican Republic, another surprise. They are in the World Cup with a 1-0 victory over Jamaica. And Guatemala, after being on penalties to beat Canada in the round of 16, they once again go to penalties after a 1-1 draw against Mexico, and they win 2-1. And probably with their keeper just being on fire, saving 3 penalties in that penalty shootout. But that was the big surprise. Mexico falling out of the World Cup and the Olympics. The U-20 World Cup and the Olympics on penalties to Guatemala.
Yeah, I'm just to shout out the keeper. Phenomenal. I mean, Mexico losing, you hate to see it. But yeah, Jorge Moreno, giant performance in goal for Guatemala.
Yeah. So now we move on to the semifinals. Again, we have the Dominican Republic, Guatemala, United States, and Honduras. They have all qualified for the U-20 World Cup. Now they are seeking to qualify for the 2024 Olympics. Dominican Republic went up against Guatemala. The Dominican Republic go up 2. They get equalized by Guatemala. They go to extra time. It's 2-2 after extra time. Once again, Guatemala is in penalties.
Guatemala goes up 2-0 to start the first half.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
Yeah,
it was
like
2-0
Guatemala. Guatemala scores. Yeah. They scored twice. And then it's not till like not late, but like midway through the second half that Dominican Republic comes back and scores.
Yes, my bad.
Two quick goals. It was 2 quick goals.
I got those mixed up. It was like in a span of like 5 minutes that they scored to kind of equalize. But yes, thank you for the correction. Guatemala goes up 2. Dominican catches up. We go to penalties. Guatemala is the penalties king, right? They still got Moreno in goal, but they end up faltering here. Dominican Republic win 4-2 on penalties to advance to the final and to the Olympics. And then the other one, which was probably the biggest matchup of the tournament, the United States took on host Honduras, and the United States win 3-0. Those 3 goals came very early in the first half. They were able to kind of coast through the second half, but they put the crowd out of it in San Pedro Sula very, very quickly. They advanced to the Olympics for the first time since 2008. I believe it's Dominican's first ever trip in the men's side to the Olympics. In the Edie side to the Olympics. So congratulations to both the Dominican Republic and the United States.
Yeah, huge moment for soccer in Dominican Republic to advance to not only the U-20 World Cup, but also the Olympics. And huge for the U.S. Honduras has been like the boogeyman for U.S. Olympic qualifying. And to finally exercise those demons in San Pedro Sula, huge effort by the U.S. team.
Yeah, I do want to shout out not just the U.S. national team, but we might as well just call them the U-20 Philly team.
Philadelphia Union Academy. Shout out.
Yeah. Shout out to Union too. Bethlehem Steel. But yeah, I mean the U.S. put on a performance. Go in both of those in that game, and then as we'll talk about in the final as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we get to the final again. The final was just for for the tournament title, but both teams, of course, were both in the World Cup and the Olympics. And it is the United States versus the Dominican Republic. And it was over pretty early, guys. It was a 6-0 victory by the United States. They started early. They did not let up, and the Dominican was kind of out of it. But you know what? The Dominican gets the consolation prize of, like I said, going to the Olympics for the very first time and also qualifying for the U-20 World Cup. So they had nothing to be ashamed of. But the United States to win this tournament, it really just kind of put the cap on like the last 13 months of American soccer, right? Like, and I know we're going to talk about it in a second, but they were the last group to play in a tournament over the last year plus, and they once again bring a trophy home to the United States.
Yeah, and a huge tournament for Paxton Aronson, son of senior national team star Brendan. 7 goals.
You mean brother?
You mean brother?
Younger child. Something like it. He is an Aaron's son.
He was our son. Yeah.
Yes, our son, our beautiful child. 7 goals in the tournament, golden ball, golden boot. Great tournament for Paxton. I also do want to shout out Edison Azcona from the Dominican Republic. He balled out in this tournament, and that kid is going places. He's tearing up the USL Championship right now, and he's going to be a star for the Dominican team for years to come. So yeah, so the U.S. finally back to the Olympics on the men's side. Our long national nightmare is over. So now that we recap these 2 tournaments, both won by the U.S., I do want to kick it to you guys. Is it good for Concacaf that the U.S. is winning everything? I mean, it is good for us. I must state, it is definitely good for us. But is it good for Concacaf that the U.S. is dominating lately?
I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily. I mean, it's kind of an aberration at the moment. I mean, the the women have dominated CONCACAF for quite a long time. And it's been for forever. But in the youth setup, it hasn't been that way. Maybe on the women's side it has, but I mean, the men's youth tournaments, it has not been the case. We talked about it. The U.S. hasn't been to a World Cup, an Olympics since 2008. There's been some great, standout teams in the U20s. You think of, the Michael Bradley, Josie Altidore age group, the Pulisic, Weston McKennie, Tyler Adams, but I mean, none of those teams have necessarily gone and won a ton on the youth level. So I think of it more as an aberration, and I think it speaks more to the drop off on the Mexican side, which we have seen FMF absolutely clearing house
by the whole sporting department,
on the entire sporting department. Like, so, I mean, I think a lot of it goes down to the fact of like, we've seen that. I think Canada is going to catch up. We've seen just the Canadian men's team really make some strides forward, topping the group in the CONCACAF side during World Cup qualifying. But that takes time. It takes time for those men's teams and these youth academies to get to where they need to be. So I don't think the domination will be a long-term domination. I think this is more of a, an exception rather than a rule.
Is it good? Yeah, sure. I mean, it's good because, I mean, people said the same thing when Mexico had their run where they were winning everything, and Canada had their run in the late 90s, early 2000s where they won a lot of major tournaments. I say a lot. I mean, for them it was like one or two. But Costa Rica, Honduras has won a lot of tournaments at the youth levels. Like, we have these cycles, as Jonathan said, we have these cycles where teams end up winning a lot in bunches. And I think for the United States, this is important because we have youth who have not experienced victory. We have youth who have not seen success. We have youth who want to test themselves in pressure situations, just like, in the final for the women, you had a bunch of players on the roster who came in the 89th minute who have less than 10 caps for their country, but they were put in a pressure situation against Canada to try and hold a victory and preserve a title and get to the Olympics. Job succeeded. Maybe next time they fail, but right now, it's not necessarily that the United States is hot right now, but they are experiencing success, and they got the taste, and now they want to keep hold of it. Will this last? Who knows, right? Like, there's a lot coming up. The World Cup's coming up. We have a Gold Cup next year for the men. We have a Women's World Cup for the women. We have an Olympics for both teams. We have we have another Gold Cup for the women, Nations League. We have a lot of tournaments coming up, and that's just on the senior level, not counting the youth levels. And as the youth levels keep kicking back up, the U.S. is going to take some hits. Mexico is going to take some hits. Canada is going to take some hits. I think it's important for the rest of CONCACAF to continue to keep building of both the men's and women's sides so that we have a competitive, confederation for decades to come in all of these areas. Everyone should be competing with each other to say, hey, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? How do we get to the next level? And because if all these teams in all these important games, if they keep improving, from St. Lucia and Anguilla all the way up to the, United States, Mexico, and Canada, the rising tide lifts all boats. And I think everyone improving is a good thing. And I think it's a good thing that the United States, despite all that, are still taking home all these trophies.
Yeah. I mean, I think overall, indirectly, it is great for CONCACAF that the U.S. is dominating, because when the U.S. is good, the U.S. when U.S. interest is high, U.S. money is high. And U.S. money is so crucial to CONCACAF's success as a whole. It's good that, honestly, for me personally, I think it's very good that U.S. is winning every CONCACAF tournament. But it's not necessarily about who's actually winning the final trophy. It's great that the U.S. is winning the final trophy, but it's not just the U.S. that's winning. You saw in the Concacaf W Championship, yes, the U.S. won and is going to the Olympics. Yes, Canada won and is going to the FIFA Women's World Cup. Costa Rica and Jamaica are both now going to just their second FIFA Women's World Cups. So it's huge for them. They had a very successful tournament. That's what's good for CONCACAF. I mean, we don't know who's going to end up getting that Olympic berth. It'll probably be Canada, but Costa Rica and Jamaica, they won. In the U-20 Championship, yes, it's great that the U.S. won. Honduras has been to 8 U-20 World Cups, but Dominican Republic is going to their first one. Guatemala is going to just their second U-20 World Cup. And Dominican Republic making their Olympic debut. So, like, as the U.S. is taking home the trophies, these mid-level countries are having historic accomplishments. And I think that's what's most important to CONCACAF. It's not that the U.S. is dominant and the best country, that best soccer country in the region. It is that the middle of the pack is on its way up and having, you guys can't see the hand motions I'm making right now. I'm talking with my hands a little bit, but
that's what these tournaments are for too. That's why we have the W Championship and the W Gold Cup and the Nations League and the Women's Nations League and, you know, the Caribbean Cups and all these little, you know, sub confederations. Shout out CFU. Like, that's why we have these tournaments, to give pressure situations to these teams so that they can pump resources into their teams to get the training up, get these guys going to different leagues and making everyone better. Because honestly, I'm sick and tired of the rest of the world saying that CONCACAF is at the bottom tier. We have some great teams in this region. We have some teams that, you know, if given the shot, they would rise to the occasion and beat some teams in other confederations. But we have to continue to improve as a confederation. These tournaments are doing that again, and it's not necessarily for the cream of the crop. It's for the middle and the lower tiers for them to get better, because they will make everybody better.
Yeah, for sure. We do have some other CONCACAF W things we want to talk about. We're going to save that for one more round. So if you're a subscriber to our Patreon, you'll be able to go there and listen to our discussion on the Concacaf W Championship and the tournament and what we actually think, if it was a success or not. That'll all be on our Patreon. You could subscribe today, patreon.com/podcacaf. Again, you can subscribe for as little as $1 a month. And that support does a lot for us, for paying for all these hosting costs and making sure that we can do this podcast.
$1 a month. That's like 1.03 euros a month.
We actually just recently got another subscriber, and they're from Canada, so it's actually $1.50 Canadian. So thank you to our Canadian fans. We appreciate your listening. Even though we're going to talk shit about Canadian soccer, it's great to have your support. We hope you enjoy the show. Donald, do you want to tell them where they can find you?
At BlazingDW on Instagram and on Twitter.
Yeah, and you can find me at JSlapeSSP on Twitter, or at Broadway Sports Media and Speedway Soccer for all other things. Yeah.
Lots of coverage of Nashville SC, who just signed a U.S. men's national team player. So big moves.
Shout out Shaq Moore.
Shout out Shaq Moore. Well, Shaq, if you got to get shown around town, you talk to the podcast. You can talk to the podcast by tweeting at us at Podcacaf, PODCACAF on Twitter. You can also slide in the DMs on the Instagram, also at Podcacaf, or shoot us an email, podcacaf@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you rate and review us. Leave into the comments if you want to go on Apple Podcasts and leave us like a review. Feel free to tell us what your favorite rums are. We love talking rum and other CONCACAF beverages. So thanks for listening in. We'll have another episode for you soon.